Hi, and welcome to Faithful Healing Journeys. I'm Sandra Roberts, a licensed clinical professional counselor. Today we'll be discussing boundaries. If you've heard about boundaries but are confused or unsure about them, how to set and maintain them, or why you even need them, or even if you understand them but are struggling with maintaining them and getting others to respect them, you're in the right place. Boundaries are limits guided by values for yourself and others. They help us to have healthy relationships that allow for both connection and protection. The reason they can be so difficult is we aren't always taught about healthy boundaries. As children, we're sometimes not allowed to have healthy boundaries. They require knowing yourself, your values, where they come from, and the ability and willingness to be assertive. Sometimes it can feel easier to just go with the flow and not think about boundaries. But knowing what your values and limits are in certain relationships and situations can greatly improve your ability to manage difficult situations, make decisions easier, and enjoy relationships more. I frequently hear people saying, but I don't have any boundaries. In reality, we all have some boundaries. They just may not be healthy. My guess is there are some things in life you are already aware you would not do. Those are boundaries you have for yourself based on a sense of right and wrong, values, and personal preferences. We can extend those boundaries to build healthier relationships in life. Although it can be a bit of a learning curve and can seem overwhelming, it's very much worth it. It's important to learn to set and maintain boundaries because they allow you to connect with others in ways that cause relationships to grow, set limits for what you will and will not do, set limits for what you will and will not accept from others, allow for more honest relationships, improve your self respect and self esteem, prevent frustration, burnout, and stress, allow you to say yes to others and feel good about it rather than resentful. And it helps others to step forward if you say no. Sometimes someone may want to volunteer for something, but if you're asked and say yes, even if you don't really want to, others may not come forward. But if you set that boundary and say, that's a really great project, but I really can't give to it what it needs, someone else who may want to and enjoy the project would come forward. They also prevent all or nothing dilemma in life and relationships. If you're struggling with the idea of boundaries, it's important to remember that we need them to help us function. Boundaries are actually freeing, even within the limits, and God is the original boundary setter. In Genesis 2:16 and 17, he instructed Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was not because he did not want to share the fruit. It was because eating from this tree would change them, the world, and their relationship with God forever. Drastic measures would have to be taken if they disobeyed. The boundary was set by God for good reason. However, as we know, Adam and Eve did not respect that boundary. They disobeyed God and ate from the tree. Be careful not to judge them. None of us has ever managed to live without sin. Because of their disobedience, they were made to leave their beautiful home in the Garden of Eden, and life changed drastically. The world changed drastically. And worst of all, their relationship with God changed drastically. They became afraid for God to see them and hid from him. They left the garden in shame, and angels were sent to guard the garden. There was no way back in for them, not without the sacrifice of Jesus. And that's the only way we can have our relationship with God restored. There were curses also that accompanied the sin. Additionally, there were other boundaries that God has set for all of mankind. As a brief example, look at the Ten Commandments. These are 10 very basic rules for how we interact with one another, ourselves, and especially God. They are boundaries for us that protect us and others. We all have boundaries, even if we aren't quite sure what they are. Some of the boundaries we have in place are for ourselves. Self boundaries would include things we know we should do, such as pay our bills, take care of our children, etc., and things we know we should not do, such as stealing or deliberately harming others. These boundaries are often based in deeply rooted values. It can help to know your values when setting boundaries. Check back soon for a video on understanding your true values versus the expectations of others. Additional boundaries we have are about the types of relationships we have with others. What do we share with them? How close do we allow them in our lives? This should be varying with different people in your life. If you find yourself feeling resentful or angry about doing something or not doing something, it might be because you did not set or maintain a healthy boundary. It might mean you need to examine your boundaries or that you need to be more assertive. In a moment, we're going to discuss how to know what your boundaries are with others, how to set healthy boundaries with others, and how to move people into the spaces that are more comfortable in your life using the target boundary system. When we get to the very basics of it, there are three styles of boundaries we could have. They're porous, rigid, or healthy. We're going to talk about each of these in some detail, but before we do, it's important to know you might find yourself in all three of these styles in different categories. We'll also address the categories of boundaries later. Let's start with porous boundaries. Imagine living in a large tent with the sides tied up to the poles. Essentially, it's a canvas roof over your head and open walls. Everything gets in, everything gets out. People, animals, insects, and weather. It's an example of all connection, no protection. This is porous boundaries, where you overshare your personal information, try to form close relationships too quickly, get over involved in other people's lives and problems, especially with the need to solve their problems, and having great difficulty saying or accepting no. This is a very risky and not very satisfying way to live. It can feel as though everything is always on the verge of collapse. Now imagine for a moment living in an absolute fortress. There are no windows, or if there are any, they're very tightly sealed and shuttered. Maybe there's a door, but it's tightly sealed and shuttered also. Nothing gets in and nothing gets out. This is all protection, no connection. It's an example of rigid boundaries. Rigid boundaries would mean struggling to share any part of life. Everything is kept very tightly secret. Emotions and information are rarely, if at all, revealed. Relationships can take a great deal of time to build to a stage of trust, and then they tend to dissolve quickly if there is a slight sense of betrayal of any kind. This is a very lonely way to live. It can feel as though there is no hope for healthy relationships, almost like you're always on the outside of things. Now let's talk about a castle. Most castles have built-in protection, such as walls, moats, and drawbridges. There are gates and entrances to get in and out, with gatekeepers who vet those who want entrance. The castle is the balance of people, animals, everything getting in and out. It is both connection and protection, the best of both worlds. There are limits with respect for yourself and others. Some people get to come through the gate at the wall and go as far as the courtyard and no farther. Some are allowed to enter only a few places within the castle, while others have much more access. You get to decide, and it depends on the type of relationship you have on how far someone gets to come. If relationships encounter disputes or difficulties, they don't have to be thrown away. The relationships can be repaired or adjusted to the new level of trust. This life allows for growth and protection. It feels safer and more interesting. We're going to talk about how to set healthy boundaries in just a moment, but before we do, we also need to discuss categories of boundaries. This is where you might find yourself in different styles. So let's identify these and then move on to the how. There are 5 categories that we're going to address today. The first is a physical boundary. That's the actual physical space between you and others. We all have a personal space bubble around us, and it may vary from person to person depending on your personality, culture, and family. Some people stand close, hug when they see each other, and are very friendly and outgoing. Others are a little more formal. They need some more distance, more personal space. They might shake hands, nod, or bow. Those are not right or wrong responses. They're just about people being who they are and their comfort zone. Being aware of your comfort zone and that of others is really important. The next type of boundary is a time boundary, and this is one we don't always think about. It includes being on time to appointments and events, respecting the length of your visits and calls with friends or professionals, and also scheduling appointments rather than just showing up. It's important to respect your time and the time of other people. Material boundaries are next. This is about our property, allowing people into our house. Do they get to come all the way in? Do they have free reign of our house? Help themselves at the refrigerator? Can they go through your purse or your medicine cabinet? All of those are material boundaries, and it can feel very violating to have people go through some of your personal things. Emotional boundaries include being disrespected for the way you feel or respected. When people say things like, don't cry, don't feel that way, stop making a fuss, it can feel as though you aren't being allowed to express your emotions. Sometimes it's more because they're uncomfortable with them and don't know what to say. Sometimes they just don't understand what you're going through or don't feel that the relationship is at a level where they can experience that kind of emotional intimacy. Intellectual boundaries include ideas and beliefs and statements about that. If someone says something to you like that's a stupid idea or don't think that way, or anyone who thinks like that's an idiot, they're disrespecting the other person's intellectual boundaries. Everyone has a right to think and feel what they think and feel. It's very different than someone telling you that you must believe what they believe. That's also a crossing of your intellectual and emotional boundaries. We're allowed to believe and feel differently, and we're allowed to express that in respectful ways. Among these boundaries, do you find yourself in the healthy, porous, or rigid zones? Are there any you would like to improve? When setting boundaries, it can be helpful to have a visual. I like to use the archery target. The closer to the bullseye, the closer the relationship. Before we begin on how to complete this to see where your boundaries currently are and where you want them to be, it's important to be able to imagine this archery target in 3 dimensions. So for example, if you were to throw a rock into a pond, it makes a circle where it hits. This circle is the bullseye on the target. It's the tiniest, smallest circle there, but it has the most depth because the circle where the rock hits is the one where the rock goes to the bottom. Once the rock drops, a series of concentric circles moves out from the center, each one larger but more shallow. That's how relationships are going to work in this exercise. The closer a circle is to the bullseye, the fewer people it can hold, but the deeper the relationships are. The further out the circle is, the more people it can hold, but the relationships become more and more shallow as the circles go out. Start by drawing your own target with about 7 or so concentric circles, leaving some room to write in each one. You can add more circles later and make changes as you like. Let's begin in the center with the bullseye. In this circle, write the following words: God, everything, me. This circle represents everything there is to know about you, from every hope, dream, fear, love, memory you've had, to your DNA sequence, every tear you've cried, and smile you've shown, to how many hairs are on your head. Everything about you is in this circle. This circle is very deep, but the only ones in this circle are you and God. No one else belongs here or can be here because no one can crawl into your head and live there with you, and that's a good thing. Everything in every other circle flows out from here, whether you personally give the information to someone or whether they infer it from your behaviors or expressions or find it on the internet or read your journal when they shouldn't have. Nothing comes out from here that you don't give. The next step is to go one circle out from the bullseye and write the word spouse or your spouse's name if you already have a spouse. If you don't have a spouse at this time, just write spouse there and move on, or leave it blank if you plan to marry one day. If not, you can just come back to this later as we add other layers in. As a spouse, there are things you share together that you don't share with other people. Write in the things that you and your spouse might share, such as finances, health information, plans for the future and retirement, a physical life, raising children if you have or plan to have them. Whatever you share with your spouse would go here. It's a small spot to put so much in, but remember, this is a circle with a great deal of depth. Now we're going to skip around for a minute and we're going to begin working from the outside in. On the outside edge of your paper, where the circles have ended, write these words: the world at large, nod, smile, hello, if I'm in the mood. This is where most of the 8 billion people in the world live and will stay. You won't meet the vast majority of them, and even if you did, it's far too many people to have relationships with. These are the people you might never see or just see in passing, for example, when driving down the road, walking past them in shops, but there's no real interactions. At most, you'll nod, smile, or say hello to them if you're in the mood to do so. Otherwise, you just pass one another and never really notice. Now, moving inward, in the outermost circle, write the words casual acquaintance. This is a large circle that will hold many people. However, the relationships here are shallow and superficial. These might be people you see and have brief interactions with. You might see them in your neighborhood, at school, at work, or in shops. Perhaps you have superficial but polite conversations about the weather and maybe some local events happening. But there wouldn't be any deep conversations or exchanges of personal information. The next circle in is for close acquaintance. A close acquaintance is not really a person who's close to you, but they have a little more of a relationship than a casual acquaintance. In this circle, a person might be someone you share a little more personal information with, such as what you do for a living, the town you live in. You might even sit down and have a cup of coffee together at work or in the neighborhood or something. You might talk about music, movies, but it's not a lot of in-depth information. These relationships are a little deeper than casual acquaintances, but they're still not very deep. The next circle in begins to have more depth. Let's mark it as friend. These are people you might share some additional personal information with. Trust is growing. The circles are getting deeper. You might want to have them over to your home for dinner or go to movies together. You might call each other to talk regularly, to ask for or give advice on basic life issues, and just share general friendship with. Now we're at the circle for close friends. As you can see, as the circles get closer to the bullseye, they're becoming more deep and more meaningful. The close friend circle has more sharing of information, time, and privileges. There's a lot more trust in this circle. There are still a few more empty circles here, and you might want to add a circle for a very best friend or for even family members who are very close. You also might have a circle for your children where they're very close, but what you share with them would be different than what you would share with friends. You can change the title of any of these categories to meet your own goals for relationships and boundaries. The important thing to see is how relationships grow slowly and how stable relationships do not move from the world at large to best friend in a few minutes. They take some time to build appropriate trust and have a solid foundation that's lasting. Additionally, when well built, if a person in a close circle hurts you in some way, it's easier to forgive, to rebuild trust, and not continue to accept hurt. If necessary, you can move the person out a circle or two until the relationship restores. And that's not always necessary. It's not always necessary to throw the relationship away. Sometimes, if the hurt is very egregious, we do have to move them out permanently to an acquaintance circle, maybe, or even at the world at large. Now that you've got the circles drawn, labeled, and defined, write what goes in each one. What level of trust do you have in each relationship? And then think about the people in your life. Write their names in the circle they really belong in, and then draw a line to the circle you want them to be in. You might find some of the people are right where you want them to be. You might find others are far too close for the level of trust you actually have. Draw a line outward to where you feel like they are. You might also find some people are farther out and you might want them to be closer to you. Draw a line and start moving them in. The important things about the boundaries, when you do it this way, it's not about limiting. It's about understanding where things are in relationships, understanding the way people behave and how to trust them more, and what behaviors from them show you how much they can be trusted. Now, how to enforce the boundaries you've chosen to set. This can be the more challenging part, as it can feel as if you need to over explain or beg the other person to not be angry or not to dislike you. None of that is necessary. Part of enforcing boundaries might be the fear of having to tell everyone you know that you have boundaries and where they are in that target, but you don't have to do this. It's fine to simply begin living in accordance with the boundaries. For example, if someone asks to borrow your car and they're nowhere near that privilege in your circle, it's okay to respond with a simple, "I'm sorry, but I really don't loan out my car." If they ask again, you might say again, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. I've given my answer and it isn't going to change." The longer you engage with the discussion, the more likely you are to change your mind, and they know this. It's also important to realize that making positive changes is great. It's healthy, but some people don't want you to do so because it doesn't meet their need or their desire, and they'll try to change your mind to get you to revert back to the status quo. If someone is not respecting your boundaries, you might need to have a conversation with them about that. It's also important to recognize that boundaries are there for the benefit of the relationship. There may be times when you move a boundary temporarily to help someone, but this needs to be at your judgment and discretion, not at someone else's badgering you. It's important to be able to have assertive communication with people. That doesn't mean aggressive. Stay tuned. We're going to have another video on assertive communication coming up. So, for example, in this instance, if someone wants to borrow your car to go to work, but you don't feel comfortable loaning it out, yet you really do want to help them, you could offer to drive them to work. Offering a different solution that still meets their needs and your needs is possible. Again, you get to set the boundary and decide what you will and won't do. Be careful about remaining in an argument with someone about the boundary or about over explaining it, because this sends the message that you aren't sure. Additionally, looking for signs that the person still likes you or isn't upset with you could also send the message that they can manipulate you to do what they want. While it's healthy to want friends and healthy relationships, needing to be liked by everyone and doing what everyone else wants to be liked are not healthy parts of relationships. Healthy relationships allow you to say no. Additionally, in healthy relationships, others should be able to say no to you without crushing you. Sometimes people just can't do what you want, and that doesn't mean you aren't important to them or that they don't like you. Separate out the moment in time request you've made from the value of your overall relationship with them. It's also important to want to help others, not just those in your closest circles, but people even in the world at large. It's important to want to help them. But you get to decide how you want to help. Then do so cheerfully and enjoy it. But do not let others guilt you into doing what you don't want. If someone says something like, "If you really liked or loved me, you would do this," or "I thought we were friends, but if you can't help me, I guess not." Don't take the guilt trip. Don't buy the ticket for the Guilt Express. Don't pack your bags. Don't take the trip. It never goes anywhere fun and it never ends. The only way off is to tuck and roll, and that's painful. Rather, instead of a guilt-ridden conversation, let your friend know that you do care about them, so much that saying no one time should not end the friendship. It means that you have limits and that's healthy. Let's talk for a moment about teeth in your boundaries and how to be a gentle but firm enforcer of your boundaries. When I say teeth in the boundaries, what I mean is a natural or related consequence for the breaking of the boundary. So if you have a really great friend and they borrow something for you and they either don't return it or they return it in a damaged state and refuse to take responsibility for it, you can still maintain a good friendship with them, but with the understanding you're just not going to loan them things anymore. Or if you have a friend who's a really good friend, but when she drinks, she calls you up and she's abusive to you or says bad things about you, and she refuses to stop doing that, you might want to think about refusing to answer the phone or not being around her when she's drinking or even moving her out to a different circle until she agrees to stop those behaviors. As a takeaway, remember that boundaries are more fluid rather than hard and fast. People and relationships change. Some days they are closer than others. Remember that some days are more giving and some days are more taking. Make sure your boundaries are not just about hard rules, but they're about relationships. And it's not just about getting something equal from the people you're giving to. Some friends need more than others, and some friends give more than others. There's a beauty in giving to people who need more, as well as in being cared for by other friends. Remember, people are not disposable. This is a long-term view of friendships. Although it can be healthy to move people around in your target as relationships get closer, more distant, throwing people back to the world at large should be a rare occurrence, only if they choose that or if they do something so egregious they cannot be trusted and it might be dangerous to keep them as friends. Keep people in the circles they show you they belong in. If they are consistently behaving as though they're in a more distant circle, that's where they're comfortable with the relationship, and respect that. As we close this discussion on boundaries, consider reevaluating your boundaries every 6 to 12 months or so. Where are they? Where do you want them to be? Is there anyone new in your life that you need to add? Are there people who have moved around? Thank you for joining the discussion on boundaries today. I hope this has been helpful to you. Please hit the subscribe button, share our videos with friends, and check back weekly for videos on upcoming topics, such as be assertive, not aggressive, self-care, not selfishness, knowing your values and yourself, and many others. A new video is released each week. Thank you for joining Faithful Healing Journeys.